Vicky Raddick grew up in Boulder City, Nevada, just outside the bright lights of Las Vegas. Born in 1961, she was known for her quiet grace and warm presence. At Boulder City High School, she built meaningful connections and moved through her school years with quiet strength, graduating in 1977. By early 1981, Vicky was 20 years old and building a life for herself in the Las Vegas area. She found local employment and entered a relationship with a man named Walter Bradley. While little is known about the nature of their relationship, it's clear they spent considerable time together. In March 1981, Vicky's family grew concerned. When she didn't return home after going out with Walter, they reported her missing to police, informing them that she had last been seen with him. Walter was brought in for questioning shortly after. During the interview, he claimed the couple had argued and that Vicky had run off afterward. His explanation immediately raised suspicions, especially due to inconsistencies in his story. But with no hard evidence to contradict him, police had no choice but to proceed carefully. Just 2 days later, those fears turned to heartbreak. Vicky's body was discovered in a remote desert area along Boulder Highway. She had suffered both blunt force and sharp force trauma. The violence of the attack left no doubt her life had been deliberately taken. Walter Daint was quickly named a person of interest. Detectives remained suspicious of his shifting story, but the lack of physical evidence or eyewitness testimony prevented any formal charges. The investigation continued, but over time, with no breakthroughs or public updates, the case slowly went cold. For decades, Vicky's family lived without answers. Then, in 2021, renewed hope emerged. Technological advances in forensic science allowed investigators to re-examine DNA samples collected during Vicky's original autopsy. The testing revealed a clear result. DNA from Walter Daint was present. This development re-energized the long-stalled investigation. In 2022 and 2023, additional evidence was submitted for further analysis. More DNA evidence was found linking both Vicky and Daint, reinforcing the narrative that had long lingered without proof. With the physical evidence finally supporting what investigators had suspected all along, the Henderson Police Department presented their findings to the Clark County District Attorney's Office. In April 2025, the DA reviewed the case and agreed Walter Daint was the only viable suspect. The long-circled suspicions had finally been confirmed by science, but a final, painful twist remained. Daint had died in 2007, nearly 2 decades before the DNA match was made. With his death, the possibility of prosecution was lost. Still, the investigation was not without meaning. The Henderson Police Department notified Vicky's surviving family of the developments, offering them the truth they had waited over 40 years to hear. Though justice would never be served in court, the truth had finally emerged, bringing a measure of closure to a family that had lived for decades in silence and sorrow. The crime was brutal, but perhaps the most heartbreaking image was of Ronald Novak's 3 loyal dogs, huddled beside his lifeless body in the freezing cold, visibly shivering as they tried to offer warmth. They refused to leave his side. When a friend discovered the horrifying scene inside Ronald's rural Walker, Iowa farmhouse on December 24, 1983, he immediately alerted the local authorities. When officers arrived, they were confronted with the magnitude of the violence. Blood spattered the walls. Signs of a fierce struggle were evident throughout the room. Near Ronald's body, a cordless phone lay abandoned beside 2 hammers and a golf club, as though he had tried to call for help but was overpowered before he could. His hands were tied behind his back, and his wallet was missing. According to his brother, Don Novak, Ronald usually carried several $100s in cash, which was nowhere to be found. Detectives also found a broken window in the kitchen door, indicating a forced entry attempt. However, the door remained locked. Oddly, Ronald's loaded shotgun, usually kept by the entrance for protection, had not been used. Investigators questioned how the assailants had entered and why Ronald hadn't reached for his weapon. In the bedroom, detectives uncovered even more disturbing details. A suitcase containing $32,000 in cash and a green duffel bag filled with over $7,600 worth of marijuana. These findings suggested the motive might extend beyond simple robbery. Outside, strong winter winds had swept the property, quickly erasing any potential footprints. No fingerprints were recovered, and neighbors hadn't seen or heard anything unusual that night. The autopsy confirmed the horror. Ronald had died from a combination of blunt force trauma, a gunshot wound to the upper right arm, and prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures. Investigators interviewed Ronald's friends and acquaintances, assembling a list of potential suspects. But without physical evidence, no arrests were made, and the case went cold. Decades passed. Then, in 2025, the case was revived thanks to advances in forensic science. Preserved evidence, including blood samples and one of the hammers used in the killing, was re-examined using modern DNA technology. The Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office worked with DNA Labs International and Parabon Nanolabs, combining forensic testing with genetic genealogy. In May 2025, their efforts paid off. A DNA match was made to Michael Shepard, a 64-year-old man living in Fairview, Oregon. DNA found on Ronald's clothing and one of the murder weapons matched Shepard's profile. Investigators believe Shepard did not act alone. The theory is that he and others went to Ronald's home with the intention of robbing him, possibly targeting the large sums of cash or marijuana he had. But the robbery turned into a savage attack. Shepard was arrested in Oregon in a joint operation between local and federal law enforcement and is currently awaiting extradition to Lynn County, Iowa, where he has been charged with first-degree murder. He remains incarcerated at the Multnomah County Detention Center in Portland. For Ronald's family, the arrest brought a mixture of emotions, relief that progress had finally been made, but also renewed grief. His sisters, who endured more than for decades without answers, described the emotional toll. One of them said, "It takes strength to endure such hardship." While Shepard awaits trial, investigators are actively pursuing leads to identify the others involved. For Ronald, Novak's family, there is hope that full justice will finally be served, and that the long silence surrounding his death will be broken. For more than 28 years, the identity of a man whose skeletal remains were discovered near 43rd Street and 7th Avenue in Tampa, Florida, remained a mystery. Alongside the bones were a resident alien card and a social security card, giving investigators hope of a quick identification. However, efforts to trace relatives or verify the documents led nowhere. Even assistance from the Mexican consulate in November 1997 yielded no helpful information at the time. Authorities struggled to determine the cause of death. They could not confirm whether the man had died from natural causes, an accident, suicide, or foul play. Without leads or technological tools, the case soon went cold. The skeletal remains were left nameless, with no new evidence surfacing despite periodic reviews over the years. In early 2024, hope returned. Advances in forensic science, particularly DNA testing and forensic genealogy, reignited interest in long-forgotten cold cases. The Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office, once limited by the tools of the 1990s, partnered with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Missing Migrants program and the Mexican consulate to reopen the case. Rather than using forensic genealogy, investigators turned to traditional DNA testing to find any possible familial matches. Their persistence paid off. In August 2024, they located a woman in Guanajuato, Mexico, who turned out to be the sister of the unidentified man. A cheek swab collected from her confirmed a familial DNA match. In May 2025, nearly 30 years after the discovery of the remains, authorities were finally able to give the man his name back, Rodolfo Barcenas Guerrero. The identification marked the end of decades of painful uncertainty. The Mexican consulate worked quickly to ensure Rodolfo's cremated remains would be returned to his family in Mexico. While the identity had been confirmed, the circumstances surrounding his death remain unresolved. The cause and manner of death, listed as undetermined in 1997, are still unknown today. Whether Rodolfo died from natural causes, met with an accident, or was the victim of something more sinister remains a mystery. In December 1983, another heartbreaking case emerged, this time in the quiet farmland of Walker, Iowa. On December 24th, a friend entered a rural farmhouse and stumbled upon a horrifying scene. Ronald Lee Novak, born November 11, 1959, was the youngest of 7 children raised in a working-class family in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He graduated from Jefferson High School in 1978 and eventually settled in the countryside outside the town of Walker. Ronald worked in construction and mechanical repair, earning a living through skilled labor. Though quiet and private by nature, he remained close to his family and friends. By Christmas 1983, Ronald was 24 and looking forward to the holidays. He had plans to celebrate with his family and girlfriend. On the night of December 23rd, his girlfriend and best friend Dale Lever were expected to visit him. But by the next morning, Christmas Eve, Ronald's life had come to a brutal and tragic end. A friend who arrived that morning discovered Ronald deceased in an unheated room of his home. The scene was violent. His hands were bound behind his back. He had suffered severe blunt force trauma, beaten repeatedly with 2 hammers and a golf club, all of which were left near his body. He had also been shot once in the upper right arm with a .22 caliber handgun. The attack appeared to be the result of a robbery or burglary gone terribly wrong. Despite an immediate investigation, the case went cold. Decades passed without justice, and Ronald's family was left without answers. What happened to him on that winter night remains one of Iowa's most haunting unsolved crimes. Kay Josephine Medine was an elementary school teacher who lived with her husband, Nicholas Medine, and their daughter in the remote town of Hyam in Trinity County, Northern California. She taught at the local Hyam school and lived a quiet, purposeful life surrounded by the beauty of the Trinity Mountains. On August 3, 1987, Nicholas returned home from a business trip to a deeply unsettling scene. Kay was missing. Her purse, glasses, and car were still at the house, items she would never have left behind voluntarily. Concerned and confused, Nicholas contacted the Trinity County Sheriff's Office to report his 48-year-old wife missing. Deputies quickly responded, searching the couple's home and the surrounding forested area. Volunteers from the close-knit community joined the effort, combing through rugged terrain and dense woods. But despite the urgency and manpower, no signs of Kay were found. She had simply vanished. Investigators spoke with friends, family, and neighbors. Everyone described Kay as stable, happy, and grounded. There had been no signs of distress, no warnings that something might be wrong. There were also no signs of forced entry or struggle, making the situation even more mysterious. Then, months later in November 1987, the case took a disturbing turn. The sheriff's department in neighboring Humboldt County received an anonymous package. Inside was a typed letter and several pieces of skeletal remains. The letter included specific instructions directing investigators to a remote area near Rural Road, approximately 45 miles from the Medine home. Acting on the directions, law enforcement discovered additional remains. Forensic specialists later confirmed they belonged to Kay Josephine Medine. Identified through dental records, though the remains confirmed her death, they raised more questions than answers. The condition of the bones prevented investigators from determining the cause of death, and the letter's sender was never identified. In 1988, a death certificate was issued, formally recognizing her passing, though the mystery of her disappearance remained unsolved. Years passed. Then, in 1993, a human skull was found by a man walking on the beach at Trinidad Head, nearly 100 miles away from Ampum. At the time, forensic technology couldn't confirm who the skull belonged to, and the case went cold. Finally, in 2025, thanks to advances in DNA technology, the skull was matched to Kay Josephine Medine. Her daughter's DNA had been used to positively identify the remains. Authorities were baffled by how parts of Kay's body ended up in two entirely different locations, -45 miles inland and 100 miles away on the coast. Nicholas Medine passed away in 2018. Law enforcement has stated he was never considered a suspect. With no arrests made and no new leads, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office continues to appeal to the public, hoping that someone, somewhere, might still come forward with the missing piece of the puzzle. In the fall of 1997, another mystery unfolded nearly 3,000 miles away in Tampa, Florida. Skeletal remains were discovered near 43rd Street and 7th Avenue. With them were two clues: a valid resident alien card and a social security card bearing the name Rodolfo Barcenas Guerrero. At first, investigators were hopeful. The identification documents seemed like a clear path forward, but attempts to trace relatives or verify the identity lead nowhere. Even the involvement of the Mexican consulate in November 1997 failed to uncover any helpful information. The man's remains sat unidentified for more than 28 years. With the cause of death unknown and no solid investigative leads, it wasn't until 2025, with the help of DNA testing and genealogical research, that the remains were finally identified as Rodolfo Barcenas Guerrero. The long wait for answers had finally ended, but the full story of how and why he died still remains hidden, waiting for someone who might remember or come forward. In February 1977, a tragic discovery shook San Jose, California. Jeanette Ralston, a 24-year-old single mother, was found dead in the back seat of her own Volkswagen Beetle. The car was parked outside an apartment complex where she had no known connections. Jeanette had recently moved to the Bay Area, working hard to build a better life for her 6-year-old son, Alan. On the night before her death, she went out with friends to a local bar. Witnesses remembered her leaving with an unknown man, saying she would be back in 10 minutes. She never returned. The next day, her body was found crammed behind the front seats of her car, indicating an attempt to hide it. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled with the sleeve of her own shirt. The killer had also tried to set the car on fire, likely in an attempt to destroy evidence, but the fire failed. A carton of Eve's cigarettes and other items were recovered from the car. A composite sketch of the man was created, but no one came forward to identify him. With limited forensic tools available at the time, the investigation quickly stalled for 48 years. The case remained unsolved. In 2024, investigators from the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Cold Case Unit and the San Jose Police Department decided to take another look using modern forensic technology. A fingerprint found on the cigarette pack was re-examined and led to a breakthrough. It matched Willie Eugene Sims, a 69-year-old man living in Ohio back in 1977. Sims had been a 21-year-old Army private stationed in Monterey County, placing him in the area at the time of the crime. Detectives traveled to Ohio to collect a DNA sample, which matched DNA found under Jeanette's fingernails and on the shirt sleeve used to strangle her. The original sketch made decades ago also bore a strong resemblance to Sims. Further investigation revealed that Sims had a violent past. In 1978, he was convicted of assault with intent to kill and served 4 years in prison. However, his DNA was never entered into the national database because he had moved out of California before CODIS was implemented. In May 2025, with the fingerprint and DNA evidence in place, Sims was arrested and charged with Jeanette's murder. If convicted, he faces a sentence of 25 years to life. For Jeanette's son, Alan, now 55, The arrest brought long overdue closure. He shared that he never truly understood the meaning of Mother's Day, having lost his mother at such a young age. "I mean, what a great Mother's Day gift and birthday present rolled into one," he said. "My whole life I never understood what Mother's Day even means." In August 1987, another case unfolded in Hyam, Northern California. A husband returned home to find his wife, Kay Josephine Maydeen, missing without explanation. For years, her disappearance remained a mystery. In February 1993, a man walking along the beach at Trinidad Head came across a human skull. Authorities developed a DNA profile, but it didn't match anyone in the national system, and the case went cold. In the years that followed, some of Kay's skeletal remains were anonymously sent to law enforcement, deepening the mystery. It wasn't until May 2025 that a major breakthrough occurred. Thanks to advancements in DNA technology and the work of Othram Labs, the remains were finally identified as belonging to Kay Josephine Maydeen, also known as Kay Adams or Kay Med. Born in 1939, Kay had lived a quiet life before her sudden disappearance. While the